So Rome's population declined after its peak in the 2nd century. At the end of that century, during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, a plague killed 2,000 people a day. Oh crap. Marcus Aurelius died in 180, his reign being the last of the 5 good emperors in Pax Romana. His son Commodus, who had been co-emperor since AD 177, assumed full imperial power, which is most generally associated with the gradual decline of the Western Roman Empire. Rome's population was only a fraction of its peak when the Aurelian War was completed in the year 273. At that year, its population was only around 500,000 people. Wow. So a massive decline in the population of the city. That's quite remarkable. I mean, that's like Detroit. Right? Like they dropped from what? 1.5 million? Like it dropped by 2/3? That's kind of insane. Starting in the 3rd century, matters changed. The crisis of the 3rd century defines the disasters and political troubles for the empire, which nearly collapsed. The new feeling of danger and the menace of barbarian invasions was clearly shown by the decision of the Emperor Aurelian, who at year 273 finished encircling the capital itself with a massive wall, which had a perimeter that measured close to 20 kilometers. Rome formerly remained capital of the empire, but emperors spent less and less time there. At the end of the 3rd century, Diocletian's political reforms, Rome was deprived of its traditional role of administrative capital of the empire. Later, Western emperors ruled from Milan or Ravenna or cities in Gaul. In 330, Constantine I established a second capital at Constantinople. At this time, part of the Roman aristocratic class moved to this new center, followed by many of the artists and craftsmen who were living in the city. Interesting. I mean, what happened was that once the wars ended, so before, when the Romans were expanding, basically people were like the legions were conquering new territories and bringing back loot and bringing back slaves, right? And bringing back the spoils of war. But once that ended and you had peace, then all parts of the Roman Empire could begin to develop, and then the natural advantages of other parts of the empire became more apparent, and so Rome became less appealing, especially in comparison to Constantinople, which is which is at the point at some kind of at some of the major trade routes from Asia, like the Silk Roads go through Constantinople. So Constantinople was much wealthier than Rome, or it had a much greater potential as a city than Rome. Rome kind of leads nowhere because it's like a city in the middle of a peninsula. It's like a dead end. Like if you want to travel around the Mediterranean, just get on a boat. If you want to travel up and down Italy, you might as well get on a boat. So it's not really a very well positioned city. I mean strategically it is. It's kind of easily defensible. If you want to attack Rome, then you kind of have to cross the Alps and then kind of march to Rome. You're gonna come in by sea. So it's like a natural like Italy is like a natural fortress. But commercially, economically, it's not really that appealing. So once the empire had peace, ironically, Rome became less appealing as a city. Anyway. However, the Senate, while stripped of most of its political power, was socially prestigious. The empire's conversion to Christianity made the Bishop of Rome, later called the Pope, the senior religious figure in Western Europe, or in the Western Empire. As officially stated in 380 by the Edict of Thessalonica, in spite of its increasingly marginal role in the empire, Rome retained its historic prestige. And this period saw the last wave of construction activity. Constantine's predecessor Maxentius built Buildings such as its basilica in the Forum, Constantine himself erected the Arch of Constantine to celebrate his victory over the former, and Diocletian built the great baths of all, or the greatest baths of all. Constantine was also the first patron of official Christian buildings in the city. He donated the Lateran Palace to the Pope and built the first great basilica, the old St. Peter's Basilica, the old one. Still, Rome remained one of the strongholds of paganism, led by the aristocrats and senators. However, the new wars did not stop the city being sacked, first by Alaric on the 24th of August 410, by Gaiseric in 455, and even by General Ricimer's unpaid Roman troops, largely composed of barbarians, on the 11th of July 472. This was the first time in almost 800 years that Rome had fallen to an enemy. Yeah. The previous sack of Rome had been accomplished by the Gauls under their leader Brennus in 387 BC. The sacking of 410 is seen as a major landmark in the decline and fall of the Western Roman Empire. So, the capital of the Roman Empire got sacked at that point, which is kind of bad for the empire, really. Saint Jerome, living in Bethlehem at the time, wrote that the city which had taken the whole world was itself taken. Yeah, there you go. These sackings of the city astonished all the Roman world. In any case, the damage caused by the sackings may have been overestimated. The population already started to decline from the late 4th century onwards, although around the middle of the 5th century it seemed that Rome continued to be the most populous city of the two parts of the empire, with a population of not less than 650,000 inhabitants. The decline greatly accelerated following the capture of Africa Proconsularis by the Vandals. What is that? Oh, that's the African provinces. So that one. Old Carthage. By the Vandals, many inhabitants now fled as the city no longer could be supplied with grain from Africa. There you go. From the mid-5th century onwards. So, up until that time, it was importing food from across the Mediterranean and Africa. And once that stopped, there's no food to keep people alive. So they had to move. At the beginning of the 6th century, Rome's population may have been less than 100,000. Many monuments were being destroyed by the citizens themselves, who stripped stones from closed temples and other precious buildings, and even burned statues to make lime for their personal use. Basically, all these old buildings were no longer being used. And so people just kind of took the marble and took the stones for themselves to build their own houses. Because, these are just abandoned buildings lying around. In addition, most of the increasing number of churches were built in this way, so you take old buildings and to build new ones. For example, the first St. Peter's Basilica was erected using spoils from the abandoned circus of Nero. Oh! This self-eating attitude was a constant feature of Rome until the Renaissance. From the 4th century, imperial edicts against stripping of stones and especially marble were common, but the need for their repetition shows that they were ineffective. Sometimes new churches were created by simply taking advantage of early pagan temples, perhaps changing the pagan god or hero to a corresponding Christian saint or martyr. In this way, the temple of Romulus and Remus became the basilica of the twin saints Cosmas and Damian. Later, the Pantheon, temple of all gods, became the church of all martyrs. They just converted old buildings to the new religions. So the circus of Nero, if you remember in the map, it's just a kind of a blank ruin, basically. If you look at, where is it here? Where is it? This thing. Where did it go? There used to be a circus here with kind of spectator stands, and where did it go? It got demolished to build other buildings. So, if you look at this picture, it used to look like that. There used to be stands around, and then you had kind of horse races around there. Well, all of that is gone. It's been taken away to build other things. You just have this kind of patch of land left. Funny they didn't build anything else on this piece of land. Just kind of left it as it is. Anyway. Alright, so Christianity. reached Rome during the 1st century AD. For the first 2 centuries of the Christian era, imperial authorities largely viewed Christianity simply as a Jewish sect, rather than a distinct religion. No emperor issued general laws against the faith or its church, and prosecutions, such as they were carried out under the authority of local government officials. A surviving letter from Pliny the Younger, governor of Bithynia, to the Emperor Trajan describes his prosecutions and executions of Christians. Trajan notably responded that Pliny should not seek out Christians nor heed anonymous denunciations, but only punish open Christians who refuse to recant. So kind of persecuting, but not really prosecuting the Christians. Suetonius mentions in passing that during the reign of Nero, punishment was inflicted on the Christians, a class of men given to a new and mischievous superstition. He gives no reason for the punishment. Tacitus reports that after the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64, some among the population held Nero responsible, and that the emperor attempted to deflect blame onto the Christians. The war against the Jews during Nero's reign, which so destabilized the empire that it led to civil war and Nero's suicide, provided an additional rationale for suppression of this Jewish sect. Basically just kind of placing blame on people with no real kind of proof of anything. Medieval Rome, barbarian and Byzantine rule. In 480, the last Western emperor, Julius Nepos, was murdered, and a Roman general of barbarian origin, Odoacer, I think, declared allegiance to the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno. Despite owing nominal allegiance to Constantinople, Odoacer was later the Ostrogoths continued, like the last emperors, to rule Italy as a virtually independent realm from Ravenna. Meanwhile, the Senate, even though long since stripped of wider powers, continued to administer Rome itself, with the Pope usually coming from a senatorial family. This situation continued until Theodahad murdered Amalasuntha, a pro-imperial Gothic queen, and usurped the power in 535. The Eastern Roman Empire, Justinian I, used this as a pretext to send forces to Italy under his famed general Belisarius, recapturing the city next year. The Byzantines successfully defended the city in a year-long siege and eventually took Ravenna. Gothic resistance revived, however, and on 17th December 546 the Ostrogoths, under Totila, recaptured and sacked Rome. Again. Just get sacked over and over again. Belisarius soon recovered the city, but the Ostrogoths retook it in 549. Belisarius was replaced by Narses, who captured Rome from the Ostrogoths for good in 552, ending the so-called Gothic Wars, which has devastated so much of Italy. I will bet. The continual war around Rome in the 530s and 540s left it in a state of total disrepair, near abandoned and desolate, with much of its lower-lying parts turned into unhealthy marshes, as the drainage systems were neglected and the Tiber's embankments fell into disrepair in the course of the latter half of the 6th century. Ew. Here malaria developed. Oh good. The aqueducts were never repaired, leading to a shrinking population of less than 50,000 concentrated near the Tiber and around the Campus Martius, abandoning those districts without water supply. There's a legend, significant though untrue, that there was a moment where no one remained living in Rome. So that was untrue. But basically, like, wars and poverty and everything else, like once the infrastructure fell apart, people had to leave. So the sewage system, the drainage system, and the aqueducts all kind of fell into this disrepair. And there's kind of no water supply, and there's no drainage. Justinian I tried to grant Rome subsidies for the maintenance of public buildings, aqueducts, and bridges, though being mostly drawn from an Italy dramatically impoverished by recent wars, these were not always sufficient. He also styled himself the patron of its remaining scholars, orators, physicians, and lawyers. in the stated hope that eventually more youths would seek a better education. After the wars, the Senate was theoretically restored, but under the supervision of the urban prefect and other officials appointed by and responsible to the Byzantine authorities in Ravenna. And that's the problem with big cities that decline as well. Like, it becomes so reliant on the infrastructure that once it falls apart, it's very difficult to recover. Because like you have to, it's expensive to maintain the infrastructure. You need the population to generate the tax base to pay for the maintenance of the city. So once the people leave, there's no money to pay for the upkeep of the city. And then once the infrastructure falls apart, people have to leave even more because they can't live there anymore, and then the tax base shrinks even more. So once you get into that cycle, it's very difficult to get out of. Anyway, however, the Pope was now one of the leading religious figures in the entire Byzantine Empire, and effectively more powerful locally than either the remaining senators or local Byzantine officials. In practice, local power in Rome devolved to the Pope, and over the next few decades, both much of the remaining possessions of the senatorial aristocracy and the local Byzantine administration in Rome were absorbed by the Church. I don't know how much of this I should read. It talks about other cities, more wars, Constantinople trying to hold on to its Italian holdings. Hadrian's tomb. I'm not gonna read all of that. You can if you want to. He put the Pantheon at a time close to centuries, thus probably saved him this. Oh, I see. Oh, interesting. The Bishop of Rome was further strengthened under the usurper Phocas. He gave the Pope the Pantheon at the time closed for centuries. There's the Pantheon, and thus probably saved it from destruction. Alright, so he gave the Pantheon to the Pope, who turned it into a temple. Not gonna read all that. None of this is really about architecture. It's kind of fascinating. I'm just skimming through it. It's kind of interesting. Alright, let's see. Then in 663, Rome had its first imperial visit for nearly 2 centuries. By Constans II, its worst disaster since the Gothic Wars, when the emperor proceeded to strip Rome of metal, including that from buildings and statues, to provide armament materials for use against the Saracens. However, for the next half-century, despite further tensions, Rome and the papacy continued to prefer continued Byzantine rule, in part because the alternative was Lombard rule, and in part because Rome's food was largely coming from papal estates elsewhere in the empire, particularly Sicily. So, the emperor came to Rome only to take all the metal away, to make weapons, to go to war. Man, this is just terrible. Not gonna read all that. Interesting, the emperor? So this talks about eventually the schism between the East and the West. How interesting. The emperor responded by confiscating large papal estates in Sicily and Calabria and transferring areas previously ecclesiastically under the Pope to the Patriarch of Constantinople. Despite the tensions, Gregory III never discontinued its support to the imperial efforts against external threats. That's the old St. Peter's Basilica. The Roman kingdom revived under the leadership of King Liutprand. He razed the countryside of Rome to punish the Pope who had supported the Duke of Spoleto. Though still protected by massive walls, the Pope could do little against the Lombard king, who managed to ally himself with the Byzantines. Other protectors were now needed. Gregory III was the first Pope to ask for concrete help from the Frankish kingdom, then under the command of Charles Martel. This is really complicated stuff. The Holy Roman Empire is German. Oh, wait, that's Charlemagne. I don't really want to read all that. Alright, okay, I see. So it crowned Charlemagne Holy Roman Emperor in St. Peter's Basilica. So that's the king of the Franks. Which is French, mostly. And that basically severed the loyalty of Rome from its imperial progeny Constantinople. It created instead a rival empire which, after a long series of conquests by Charlemagne, now encompassed most of the Christian Western territories. Following the death of Charlemagne, the lack of a figure with equal prestige led the new institution into disagreement. At the same time, the Universal Church of Rome had to face emergence of the lay interests of the city itself, spurred on by the conviction that the Roman people, though impoverished and abased, had again the right to elect the Western Emperor. The famous counterfeit document called the Donation of Constantine, prepared by the papal notaries, guaranteed to the Pope a dominion stretching from Ravenna to Gaeta. This nominally included the suzerainty over Rome, but this was often highly disputed, and as the centuries passed, only the strongest popes were able to assert it. The main element of weakness of the papacy within the walls of the city was the continued necessity of the election of new popes, in which the emerging noble families soon managed to insert a leading role for themselves. The neighboring powers, namely the Duchy of Spoleto and Toscana, and later the emperors, learned how to take their own advantage of this internal weakness, playing the role of arbiters among the contestants. So the fact that a pope had to be elected every now and then made it vulnerable to influence by neighboring powers. Rome was indeed prey of anarchy in this age. The lowest point was touched in 897, when a raging crowd exhumed the corpse of a dead pope, Formosus, and put it on trial. Ew. So, pretty bad times. Pilgrimage, Roman copy. Maybe I should skip ahead to the Renaissance? Man, this is a bit long and complicated. The Vatican, the papacy, history. Oh, this is the Vatican. We're not really interested in the. Oh, maybe we are. Alright, the 14th and 15th century, with the absence of the popes during the Avignon papacy, was a century of neglect and misery for the city of Rome, which dropped to its lowest level of population. With the return of the papacy to Rome, okay, here we go, some happy news for once, repeatedly postponed because of bad conditions. Oh, that's bad news. Because of the bad conditions of the city and the lack of control and security, it was first necessary to strengthen the political and doctrinal aspects of the pontiff. When in 1377 Gregory the XI was in fact returned to Rome, he found the city in anarchy because of the struggles between the nobility and the popular faction, and in which his power was now more formal than real. There followed 4 decades of instability, characterized by the local power struggle between the commune and the papacy, and internationally by the Great Western Schism, at the end of which was elected Pope Martin V. He restored order, laying the foundations of its rebirth. Alright, here we go, good news. In 1433, the Duke of Milan, Filippo Maria Visconti, signed a peace treaty with Florence and Venice. He then sent the condottieri Niccolo Fortebraccio and Francesco Sforza to harass the Papal States, in vengeance for Eugene IV's support to the 2 former republics. Interesting. Fortebraccio, supported by the Colonna, occupied Trivoli in October 1433 and ravaged Rome's countryside. Despite the concessions made by Eugene to the Visconti, the Milanese soldiers did not stop their destruction. This led the Romans, on the 29th of May 1434, to institute a republican government under Benderese. Eugene left the city a few days later during the night of the 4th of June. However, the Benderese proved incapable of governing the city, and their inadequacies and violence soon deprived them of popular support. The city was therefore returned to Eugene by the army of Giovanni Vitelleschi, or it says Vitelleschi, on the 26th of October 1434. After the death in mysterious circumstances of Vitelleschi, the city came under the control of Ludovico Scarampo, Patriarch of Aquileia. Eugene returned to Rome on the 28th of September 1443. Hey, Renaissance Rome. The latter half of the 15th century saw the seat of the Italian Renaissance move to Rome from Florence. There's a big gap in there, huh? The papacy wanted to surpass the grandeur of other Italian cities. To this end, the Pope created increasingly extravagant churches, bridges, town squares, and public spaces, including a new St. Peter's Basilica, which we see building in the game. The Sistine Chapel, Ponte Sisto, the first bridge to be built across the Tiber since antiquity, and Piazza Navona. The popes were also patrons of the arts, engaging such artists as Michelangelo, Perugino, Raphael, Ghirlandaio, Luca Signorelli, Botticelli, and Cosimo Rosselli. Under Pope Nicholas V, who became pontiff on the 19th of March 1447, the Renaissance can be said to have begun in Rome, heralding a period in which the city became the center of humanism. He was the first pope to embellish the Roman court with scholars and artists, including Lorenzo Valla and Vespasiano da Bisticci. On the 4th of September 1449, Nicholas proclaimed the Jubilee for the following year, which saw a great influx of pilgrims from all Europe. The crowd was so large that in December on Ponte San Angelo, some 200 people died. Yay! Crushed underfoot or drowned in the river Tiber. Later that year, the plague reappeared in the city and Nicholas fled. Somebody needs to fix the sewers, man. However, Nicholas brought stability to the temporal power of the papacy, a power in which the emperor was to have no part at all. In this way, the coronation and the marriage of Frederick III, Holy Roman Emperor, on the 16th of March 1452, was a most civil ceremony. The papacy now controlled Rome with a strong hand. A plot by Stefano Porcari, whose aim was the restoration of the Republic, was ruthlessly suppressed. On January 14th, 1553, Porcari was hanged together with the other plotters Francesco Gabardeo, Pietro de Monterotondo, Battista Sciarra, and Angiolo Ronconi. But the Pope gained a treacherous reputation, as when the execution was beginning, he was too drunk to confirm the grace he had previously given to Sciarra and Ronconi. Too drunk. Wow. Nicholas was also actively involved in Rome's urban renewal, in collaboration with Leon Battista Alberti, including the construction of a new St. Peter's Basilica. So that's when Rome got rebuilt and finally started growing again. Nicholas's successor, Calixtus III, neglected Nicholas's cultural policies, instead devoting himself to his greatest passion, his nephews. The Tuscan Pius II, who took the reins after his death in 1458, was a great humanist, but did little for Rome. During his reign, Lorenzo Valla demonstrated that the donation of Constantine was a forgery. Pius was the first pope to use guns in campaign against the rebel barons Savelli in the neighborhood of Rome. In 1461, 1 year later, the bringing to Rome of the head of the apostle St. Andrew produced a great number of pilgrims. The reign of Pope Paul II was notable only for the reintroduction of the carnival, which was to become a very popular feast in Rome in the following centuries. In the same year, 1468, a plot against the Rome Pope was uncovered, organized by the intellectuals of the Roman Academy, founded by Pomponio Leto. The conspirators were sent to Castel San Angelo, a prison. More important by far was the pontificate. I don't want to read all this. Rome had a really long history, alright? Let's just say that. He restored several churches, including Santa Maria del Popolo, the Aqua Virgo, which is an aqueduct, and the Hospital of the Holy Spirit, paved several streets, and also built a famous bridge over the Tiber, which still bears his name. What's his name? Colonna. No, it was Sixtus. The first Pope King of Rome. So he started rebuilding some stuff. His main building project was the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican Palace. Its decoration called on some of the most renowned artists of the age, including Mino da Fiesole, Sandro Botticelli, Domenico Ghirlandaio, Pietro Perugino, Luca Signorelli, and Pinturicchio. And in the 16th century, Michelangelo decorated the ceiling with his famous masterpiece, contributing to what became one of the most famous monuments of the world. Sixtus died on the 12th of August, so he was a builder. Chaos, corruption, and nepotism appeared in Rome under the reign of his successors Innocent VIII and Pope Alexander VI. During the vacation period between the death of the former and the election of the latter, there were 220 murders in the city. Wow. Alexander had to face Charles VIII of France, who invaded Italy in 1494 and entered Rome on the 31st of December of that year. The Pope could only barricade himself into the Castel San Angelo, which had been turned into a true fortress by Antonio da Sangallo the Younger. In the end, the skillful Alexander was able to gain the support of the king, assigning his son Cesare Borgia as military counselor for the subsequent invasion of the Kingdom of Naples. Borgia. So Alexander is Rodrigo Borgia. Yeah. He's Rodrigo Borgia in the game, right? Right, bird name? Rodrigo Borgia. Yeah, that's him. That's Cesare. Presumed portress of Lucrezia. So he had plenty of kids. Anyway, there he is. Rome was safe, and as the king directed himself southwards, the Pope again changed his position, joining the anti-French League of the Italian states, which finally compelled Charles to flee to France. Interesting. The most nepotist pope of all, Alexander, favored his ruthless son Cesare, creating for him a personal duchy out of the territories of the Papal States, and banning from Rome Cesare's most relentless enemy, the Orsini family. In 1500, the city hosted a new jubilee but grew ever more unsafe, as especially at night the streets were controlled by bands of lawless bravi. Cesare himself assassinated Alfonso of Bisceglie, Bisceglie? I don't know how to pronounce that, man. As well as presumably the Pope's son Giovanni of Gandia. So, I mean, they are real people, but the game is not a real story. The Renaissance had a great impact on Rome's appearance, with works like the Pietà by Michelangelo and the frescoes of the Borgia apartment, all made during Innocent's reign. Rome reached the highest point of splendor under Pope Julius II, and his successors Leo X and Clement VII, both members of the Medici family. During this 20-year period, Rome became the greatest center of art in the world. The old St. Peter's Basilica was demolished and a new one begun. The city hosted artists like Bramante, who built the Temple of St. Pietro in Montorio, and planned a great project to renovate the Vatican. Raphael, who in Rome became the most famous painter in Italy, creating frescoes in the Cappella Nicolina, the Villa Farnesina, the Raphael's rooms, and many other famous paintings. Michelangelo became... We're talking about the Ninja Turtles, aren't we? Michelangelo began the decoration of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and executed the famous statue of Moses for the tomb of Julius. Rome lost part of its religious character, becoming increasingly a true Renaissance city, with a great number of popular feasts, horse races, parties, intrigues, and licentious episodes. Its economy was prosperous, with the presence of several Tuscan bankers, including Agostino Chigi, a friend of Raphael and a patron of the arts. Despite his premature death, and to his eternal credit, Raphael also promoted for the first time the preservation of the ancient ruins. For the first time. I feel like we should stop there, because the rest of the history there is after the game. Much after. Although Rome got sacked again, and then... Actually, the view of Rome North circa 1640, that might be interesting. This might be actually... This looks a lot like the Rome in game. Right, there's the Pantheon. So north is that way. There's a Tiber, there's the island. That is supposedly Castel Sant'Angelo and St. Peter's Basilica. This actually looks a lot like the Rome in game. It looks exactly like the Rome in game. Look at this. Can I make this any bigger? Bigger. Okay, way too big. Let's just look at this. Yeah, I think maybe the Rome in game was based on this. So there's the Colosseum. Hold on, let me just. There's a Colosseum there. I don't see the circus. Oh, that's supposed to be the circus, isn't it? Right. And then, yeah, this looks like the one in game. Interesting. Interesting. St. Peter's is there. So you see the square is not there yet. The columns and the stuff. Interesting. That looks just like the one in game. Look at that. Even the tower. There's... Wait a minute. Isn't that supposed to be Piazza del Popolo? Oh no, wait. Piazza del Popolo. No, that's the other one. My bad. It should be there. Okay, here we go. What language is that? Platea Populi. Huh. This one was... Oh, I forgot his name again, damn it. Agnolis? Agonis? I don't know what language this is. Hey, this looks like the Roman game. Martin Luther, alright. The Pope's greed. Renovations. I'm just gonna pick out the architecture stuff and the city stuff, if possible. Like, there's a lot of intrigues and Pope and corruption and stuff like that. And anti-Semitism. Jewish ghettos. Oh crap. 1460, yeah, okay. No, oh, here we go. So Sisters V was of a very different temper. Although short, his reign, however, remained remembered as one of the most effective and in the modern Rome's history. One of the most effective in the modern Rome's history. He was even tougher than Pius V and was variously nicknamed Castigamati, Punisher of the Mad, Papa di Ferro, Iron Pope, dictator, and even, ironically, demon, since no other pope before him pursued with such a determination the reform of the church and the customs. Sisters profoundly reorganized the Papal State's administration and cleaned the streets of Rome of thugs, procurers, dueling, and so on. Even the nobles and cardinals who could not consider themselves free from the arms of the sisters' police. The money from taxes which were not now wasted in corruption, permitted an ambitious building program. Some ancient aqueducts were restored and a new one, Aqueducto Felice, from sisters named Felice Peretti, was constructed. A new aqueduct was constructed. Some of the ancient ones were restored and a new aqueduct was constructed. That's amazing! Like, it's been so long since the fall of the Roman Empire and everything fell into decline. And finally they're building a new aqueduct. New houses were built in the desolate districts of Esquilino, Viminale, and Quirinale, while old houses in the center of the city were destroyed to open new larger streets. Yeah, Sisters was the one who did that. So he kind of demolished old houses to make the streets wider. Sisters' principal aim was to make Rome a better destination for pilgrimages, and the new streets were intended to permit a better access to the major basilicas. Old obelisks were moved or erected to embellish St. John in Lateran, Santa Maria Maggiore, and St. Peter, as well as Piazza del Popolo in front of Santa Maria del Popolo. Some of the most famous views of Rome in the 18th century were etched by Giovanni Battista Piranesi. His grand vision of classic Rome inspired many to visit the city and examine the ruins themselves. Alright, I think that's pretty much the whole of the history that's relevant today. And I think the most interesting part might be these two maps. Actually, where was it? Damn it, I lost it. These two maps here. Because this really does look like what we see in game, doesn't it? That's the other view. Oh, this is the southern half. Yeah, this is pretty much the Roman game. So that's the history of Rome. What else do we have to say here? So that's the history. Government? I don't think we need to look at the modern government. Geography? Rome is in the Lazio region of central Italy on the Tiber River. The original settlement developed on the hills that faced into a ford beside the Tiber Island. The only natural ford of the river in this area. The Rome of the Kings was built on 7 hills. The Aventine Hill, the Caelian Hill, the Capitoline Hill, the Aquiline Hill, the Esquiline Hill, I don't know how to pronounce that, the Palatine Hill, and the Quirino Hill, and the Vimino Hill. Modern Rome is also crossed by another river, the Enian, which flows into Tiber north of the historic center. I'm really bad with these names. Although the city center is about 24 kilometers inland from the Tyrrhenian Sea, the city territory extends to the shore, where the southwestern district of Ostia is located. The altitude of the central part of Rome ranges from 13 meters above sea level at the base of the Pantheon to 139 meters above sea level at the peak of Monte Mario. The commune of Rome covers an overall area of about 1,285 square kilometers, including many green areas. Right. Throughout the history of Rome, the urban limits of the city were considered to be the area within the city walls. Originally, these consisted of the Servian Wall, which was built 12 years after the Gaulish sack of the city in 390 BC. This contained most of the Esquiline and Caelian hills, as well as the whole of the other 5. Rome outgrew the Servian Wall, but no more walls were constructed until almost 700 years later, when in 270 AD Emperor Aurelian began building the Aurelian Walls. These were almost 19 kilometers long, and were still the walls the troops of the Kingdom of Italy had to breach to enter the city in 1870. The city's urban area is cut in two by its ring road, the Grande Raccordo Anulare, the GRA, finished in 1962, which circles the city center at a distance of about 10 kilometers. Although when the ring was completed, most of the inhabited area lay inside it. One of the few exceptions was the former city of Ostia, which lies along the Tyrrhenian coast. In the meantime, quarters have been built, which extends up to 20 kilometers beyond it. The commune covers an area roughly 3 times the total area within the Raccordo and is comparable in area to the entire provinces of Milan and Naples, and to an area 6 times the size of the territory of these cities. Alright. So it's big. Climate, we don't really need to know. Demographics, interesting. So even 1861, the population is only less than 200,000 people. And then it just ballooned. I guess this is like the... Yeah, okay. So between the 2 world wars, it grew massively, and then after the Second World War, it grew quite a bit too. Vatican City. Right, so we don't see this in the game at all. This was like the dome is not even finished in the game. Cityscape as a Colosseum and an Arch of Constantine, we can see that in the game. Pantheon we've seen. Castel San Angelo we see in the game. Panoramic view of Piazza del Campidoglino? Campidoglino? With a copy of the Etruscan statue of Marcus Aurelius. So we see that in the game as well. Those are not in the game. These are neoclassical, which means 1870. So we don't see that. Fascist architecture we don't see. That is one of the most famous fountains in the world, but built much later than the game. Although we can read this, like Rome is a city famous for its numerous fountains, built in all different styles, from classical to medieval to Baroque and neoclassical. The city has had fountains for more than 2,000 years, and they have provided drinking water and decorated the piazzas of Rome. During the Roman Empire in 98 AD, according to Sestus Julius Frontinus, the Roman consul who was named Curator Aquarum, or the guardian of the water of the city, Rome had 9 aqueducts, which fed 39 monumental fountains and 591 public basins, not counting the water supply to the imperial household, baths, and the owners of private villas. Each of the major fountains was connected to 2 different aqueducts in case one was shut down for service. So that's the water supply of the city. During the 17th and 18th century, Roman popes reconstructed other ruined Roman aqueducts and built new display fountains to mark their termini, launching the golden age of the Roman fountain. The fountains of Rome, like the paintings of Rubens, were expressions of the new style of Baroque art. Alright. But that's much later. So during the Roman Empire, the aqueducts, 9 aqueducts feeding 39 monumental fountains, so big ones, and then 591 public basins. These are like little literally just kind of basins. There's like a tap, and then the tap is always running because it's just feeding in water from the aqueducts, and you can kind of get water from these taps. Statues. I don't really think. I mean, there's kind of obelisks and columns, bridges. I think we'll look at these in detail when we look at the actual buildings, like the bridges and things. Alright, I think we should stop reading there. Oh, look, Colosseum. Culture, tourism, there's a Colosseum. It's massive, right? Alright, let's end that there. I don't really know what else to talk about now. I don't really think there's anything else to say until we just go to the buildings. We've done a lot of reading. I don't know how interesting that is for you guys. I've skipped a lot of stuff. I've read the stuff that I thought was interesting. So, I mean, the city started in war, I guess, like the Roman Republic and then the Roman Empire grew out of violence. And, you know, with the aqueducts and the sewers and the import of grain, the city managed to support 1.5 million people or so. And then once the Roman Empire fell, all of the infrastructure fell apart, and the food imports stopped. And then people had to leave because like everything's built up, so there's no farms nearby. You kind of have to move somewhere else to get food if the food imports stop. And that happened for a long time, and a lot of kind of fighting over a dead city for a while, until the popes regained power and they started rebuilding it, because it was still the capital of Christianity. You know, it was still the capital of well, at least of the Catholics. And so even if the city itself didn't support very many people, it could attract pilgrims, and the Pope still had some influence, and there were a lot of interesting things to see. And eventually the popes got back in control and they started rebuilding the place, and it revived in the Renaissance. Although the population never really got back to its previous levels until the aqueducts got repaired. And then eventually with modern technology, the water supply and the sewers and the food supply became less of a problem, and then the population grew again. So so the achievements of the Romans, of the Roman Empire, or the Roman, I guess, Republic, in building a city that could support 1.5 million people was not really replicated until very recently. And that's just infrastructure and engineering. Okay, so we'll stop this here. When we come back, I think we'll do the Colosseum next, or maybe the Pantheon next. We'll just pick the most iconic buildings first, and then move on to the other stuff later on, shall we? Let's do the Colosseum next. I'll see you guys in the next video.